It's like, you're trying to keep up with everything that's going on, right? All the big stuff, the things that really matter. But man, it's just so much information all the time.
It really is. You can feel buried in it sometimes.
And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're focusing in on something that has some of the biggest names in U.S. AI really concerned.
Oh yeah, they're definitely paying attention to this.
It's about how fast AI is advancing in China and what that could mean for the U.S., for America's place in, the whole AI world.
Absolutely. And we're going right to the source here. We've got these formal submissions, they were made just last month, March 2025, by a bunch of the leading American AI companies.
Yeah, these weren't just, off-the-cuff remarks or anything.
No, this was serious stuff. They were responding to a government request, part of this whole national AI action plan they're putting together. So, they put some real thought into this.
Right, this is straight from the people who are actually building the AI of the future. And they're laying out, all the challenges they see, the things that could knock America off its, top spot.
Exactly.
So what we're doing in this deep dive is we're pulling out the really important stuff.
The key takeaways.
Right. Like, what are they seeing specifically? What are they worried about, down the line? And what are their ideas for how America should respond to all this?
A blueprint, almost.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's start with the thing that seems to have them all buzzing, which is the AI coming out of China.
It's hard to ignore.
Yeah. The submissions, over and over, they keep mentioning these specific AI models coming out of China.
Names like DeepSeek R1, and Baidu, they've got this whole Ernie series, Ernie X1, Ernie 4.5.
And it's that DeepSeek R1 that seems to be, really getting their attention.
Front and center.
Yeah. So what is it about DeepSeek R1 that's got them, so interested, so concerned?
Well, one of the most interesting things here is OpenAI themselves. One of the leaders in the field, they came right out and said it publicly that DeepSeek R1 shows the gap is closing.
The gap?
The gap in AI between the US and China. It's not as wide as it used to be.
Yeah.
And for a company like OpenAI to admit that, well, that says something.
It does. And it's not just about what DeepSeek can do, right? It's also about how it's set up.
How it's positioned, yeah.
OpenAI, they described it as, and I'm quoting here, state-subsidized, state-controlled, and freely available. And that raises some big questions.
It's a powerful combination.
It is. And that state-controlled part, that's what immediately gets people thinking about, influence.
Right. Could the Chinese government be calling the shots?
Exactly. OpenAI, they even compared it to Huawei. You remember? The telecom company.
Oh, yeah. That whole situation.
And the worry is that, China could use DeepSeek to mess with important stuff in the U.S. Systems, infrastructure, things like that.
Sensitive stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And that Huawei comparison, well, anyone who remembers that, it's gonna set off some alarm bells.
Understandably. And on top of the security stuff, you've got the whole data privacy issue.
Oh, right.
OpenAI, they were concerned about, Chinese law. What if they force DeepSeek to hand over all its user data to the government?
Wow. So not only is there the privacy risk for, anyone using DeepSeek, but then China could also use that data to make their own AI even better.
Huge advantage. Think about how much data we're talking about.
So it's a double whammy, potential security problems, and then a leg up in the data game.
It's a lot to unpack.
Okay, so let's move over to Baidu now and their Ernie models.
The X1 and the 4.5, yeah.
They seem to be coming at it from a different angle.
They are. Now, Baidu, they're claiming that their Ernie X1, it performs just as well as DeepSeek R1, but it costs half as much.
Half the price.
That's what they're saying. Now, of course, we got to see if that holds up, Someone needs to really test it out.
Right, of course.
But if it's true, that changes the whole game, for developers, for access.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Half the price for the same performance, that's a headline. And then there's the 4.5, which is...
even more aggressive.
Yeah, it's almost hard to believe. Baidu's saying that the 4.5, it costs just 1%. 1% of what OpenAI's GPT 4.5 costs.
It's a bold claim.
It is. And on top of that, they're saying it actually performs better than GPT 4.5 on a bunch of tests.
Benchmarks, yeah. And we always have to take those with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
Every company is going to say their thing is the best.
Sure.
But even if it's close, that price difference, it's wild.
1%. I mean, it's almost like they're giving it away.
Yeah.
So, if all of this is even sort of true, that puts a huge amount of pressure on American AI companies.
Absolutely. It forces them to rethink their whole approach,
Yeah, like how can they compete with prices like that?
Right. Can they keep charging what they're charging? Do they have to cut costs somewhere? And if they do, does that mean less money for research and development? It gets complicated fast.
And it's not just about undercutting the competition on price either. Baidu's got another trick up their sleeve when it comes to making their models, accessible.
Oh yeah, they're going all in on open sourcing. Robin Lai, their CEO, he said it himself. They learned from DeepSeek, he said.
Learned what?
That when you make your top models open source, people use them. Like way more people. It means more experimentation, people building new things with it, integrating it into all kinds of systems.
So not only cheaper, but also more open, more available to developers.
Exactly. And they're not just talking about it, they're doing it. They announced they're going to open source the whole Ernie 4.5 series starting June 30th.
Wow, so soon.
Yeah. And that could really change things, speed up adoption, put even more pressure on US companies. Because when a model's open source, it's like anyone can take it and run with it, build on it, make it their own.
It's like giving away the recipe.
Yeah, kind of. And the interesting thing is the early feedback on these Chinese models, it's been pretty good.
Really?
Yeah. There's this guy, Alvin Fu, he's a venture partner at Zero2 Launch, and he was on social media saying he's been using Baidu's models a lot, and he's impressed. He said the performance is great.
So it's not just cheap, it actually works.
That's the thing, it's the combination, Affordable and powerful, that's what's making these Chinese models so appealing to developers all over.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. When we look at all of this, and what these American AI companies are saying, what's the big picture here?
The big picture is they're not just worried about, who's got the best AI or who's got the cheapest AI. It's deeper than that. They see real risks here for America's security, for the economy.
Yeah, those are the big two, for sure.
And they're connected, Remember what OpenAI said about the Chinese regulations? That they could force DeepSeek to, manipulate its models?
Yeah, to do what?
Well, they were talking about potentially messing with U.S. infrastructure. Or, sensitive applications, think about power grids, communication networks, financial systems.
That's scary stuff.
It is. It's a national security risk, plain and simple.
And then Anthropic, they were talking about biosecurity, which is, that's a whole other can of worms.
Right. It's a different kind of threat, but just as serious.
They said their own model, Claude 3.7 Sonnet, showed that it could be used to develop biological weapons.
Which is terrifying. But it also highlights something really important about AI in general. It's not inherently good or bad. It's a tool. It's what you do with it that matters.
It's a very powerful tool.
Exactly. And so we have to think about both sides of that, the potential for good and the potential for harm. And Anthropic, they were also worried about those export controls on AI chips, remember?
Oh, right.
They said, sure, the NVIDIA H20 chips, they meet the current restrictions. They can't be sold to certain places. But they're still really good at text generation, and that's key for reinforcement learning, which is how you train AI to get better.
So their point was, even with the restrictions, China's still getting access to the tech they need to improve their AI.
That was their argument, yeah. And they called for tighter controls, like, are we doing enough to stay ahead of the curve? That's the question they're raising.
And Google, they had a bit of a different take on all this, right?
Yeah, Google was a little more cautious. They said, look, we know there are security risks, but we got to be careful about over-regulating,
Because it could hurt us more than it helps.
That was their worry. If we make it too hard for our own companies to do business, especially those cloud providers, we could actually fall behind.
So they were saying, target the controls, focus on the really dangerous stuff, but don't stifle innovation.
Precisely. It's a balancing act for sure.
It is. So given all these challenges, these risks, what are these companies proposing? What do they think America should do to stay on top?
Well, there's one thing they all agree on, and that's the need for the government to step up in a big way. More oversight, more investment, especially in infrastructure.
Infrastructure, like roads and bridges.
Well, not exactly. Think more like the power grid, the internet, the things that support all this digital stuff. And Anthropic, they had some pretty mind-blowing projections about how much power AI is going to need in the future.
How much are we talking?
They said that by 2027, just training one single advanced AI model could take 5 gigawatts of power.
5 gigawatts?
That's like several nuclear power plants. And they said we need a national goal to add 50 gigawatts of dedicated power capacity for AI by 2027. Plus, they said we need to make it easier to build the infrastructure to transmit all that power.
So it's not just about the code, it's about the whole system that supports it.
It's all connected. And OpenAI, they framed the whole competition in a more ideological way.
Ideological.
Yeah, they talked about a battle between democratic AI and authoritarian AI.
Wow, that's pretty big picture stuff.
It is. Their argument was the free market, less government interference, that's what's going to lead to the best AI.
So let the best ideas win, basically.
Right. Trust the market, let it sort itself out. And Google, they were more focused on specific policy recommendations like we talked about before.
Right, the more practical stuff.
Yeah. They said increase funding for AI research, give AI companies better access to government contracts, streamline the export controls. And they also said the government needs to be faster at adopting new AI tech itself.
So a mix of investment, philosophy, and practical policy changes.
Exactly. And when we look at the specific regulatory strategies they're proposing, there's a big theme that runs through all of them. They want a unified federal approach. Meaning they don't want a patchwork of different rules in every state. They want one set of rules for the whole country.
Makes sense.
And OpenAI, they specifically said the Department of Commerce should be in charge of this. And they reiterated their idea about tiered export controls, Easier to share tech with democratic countries, stricter with authoritarian ones.
Makes sense given their whole democratic AI thing.
Right. And Anthropic, they were more on the side of caution, They said, let's make those export controls even tighter, not just for hardware, but for the data too.
So control the fuel that feeds the AI, basically.
Right. And Google, they brought up the whole copyright issue, which is huge.
Copyright.
Yeah, like how does copyright law apply to AI? Google said we have to make sure that fair use is protected because AI needs to be able to access a lot of data to learn and grow. If we make the copyright rules too strict, it could actually hurt American AI.
So there's a legal side to this whole thing, too.
There is. And finally, all three companies, they all said the government needs to get better at using AI itself. Streamline the procurement process, make it easier to adopt new tech, improve the way government systems talk to each other.
So the government needs to be a leader in using AI, not just regulating it.
That's their message for sure.
So the bottom line here is American AI companies, they see what's happening in China. They see the progress being made, and they're not just sitting back and watching. They're concerned, and they're offering solutions.
It's a wake-up call, for sure. They're saying we need to be smart, we need to invest, we need to get our act together if we want to stay ahead.
And there's no easy answer, right? It's not like there's one magic solution.
No. It's a complex issue, and it's going to take a combination of approaches to get it right. More investment, smarter regulation, a clear strategy for the future.
And it's something we all need to be thinking about, because AI is going to affect all of our lives in ways we can't even imagine yet.
It already is in many ways.
So the question for all of us is, what do we think is the most important thing for America to do to stay competitive and safe in this new AI world? That's something to think about.
It's a question that's not going away anytime soon.
It isn't. And that's all the time we have for this deep dive, but keep those questions in mind because this conversation is just getting started.
It is, and the stakes are only getting higher.